this is Roland Millington from The Lowest Note, and I'm here today to talk to you a little bit about buying a bargain basement bass, or guitar even, and turning it into something that you're not just really happy with, but also kind of proud of, and maybe brag on a little bit because you got such a great deal on it, and it sounds so good. Little history about bargain basement instruments. Usually they've been purchased and owned previously by somebody who either didn't take care of them or didn't know how to set them up, and the instrument is not typically set up very well from the factory. They just kind of do a rush job to say, yeah, there's strings on it, and yeah, they're off of the pickups and whatnot. They're making them to a price point, so they can't spend a lot of time on them. Well, what you need to do, and maybe you've purchased something recently that doesn't play all that well, is go through the instrument and set it up properly. The first thing that you need to do is grab yourself a little screwdriver and find every single screw on this instrument and make sure that it's screwed down properly. Not the least of which is the bridge, because any one of those 5 screws on a classic vibe like this, if they're not making contact, you'll hollow out the tone a great deal because you're not making solid tonal contact throughout the bass. So it doesn't vibrate correctly, or it gets sympathetic vibrations that weren't supposed to be there, and it deadens the output of the string. The string dies, the attack dies too quickly, doesn't have a nice body of tone running through it. Some other things to look for is the shielding in the instrument. Typically these instruments, and especially when you're talking about a classic vibe which has a little metal plate right there, you know, the classic series, or a jazz bass with a metal plate, typically their control cavities and the pickup cavities have been sprayed with shielding paint, and there's a good and a bad to that. Number one, shielding paint, I don't really see the point. It doesn't do as good a job as copper foil shielding, and I always end up running copper foil shielding into the cavities of my instruments anyway, just because it does a much better job. So the downside is it's shielding paint. The upside is usually, and I mostly encountered this on Squiers, Fenders, some Epiphones and some Yamahas and whatnot, there's already a grounding lug that's been screwed into the shielding paint that either runs to a pot or runs to the actual jack of the instrument to ground the internal cavity. Now, like I said, there's typically no contact between that shielding paint and any of the jacks, any of the foil or whatnot, especially on some of these instruments. If they have a foil-backed pickguard or backplate cover or whatnot, there's not enough contact there to actually seal the cavity from any of the interference that you're trying to get rid of when you shield it anyway. So most of the time you just do that little bit of overlap, and all of a sudden you've got an instrument that was kind of noisy and buzzy and whatnot, and then all of a sudden it's quiet, and you can start, oh, there's a sweet tone to this instrument. I can start hearing it now because I'm not dealing with all that other crap. Some of the other things you might want to look at is the wiring of the instrument. Is it decent? Is it heavy enough? Not just so much that it's going to actually carry a decent current, but also is it heavy enough to actually withstand, you know, any types of bumps or rattles or adjusting? Are the jacks screwed down properly? Has somebody replaced the jack? Is it a barrel jack? I have a Yamaha bass that I bought in 1987. One of the first things that I had problems with on that was a barrel jack. Replace it with a switchcraft if you can. Sometimes you can, sometimes you can't. Sometimes it's like an amp, they're all part of a circuit board, it's a pain in the neck. But if you can fix it and you can replace it, replace it. So basically all of those things in a general setup, going through the neck, going through the intonation, making sure that the heights of the pickup are correct and that they're balanced if you have more than one pickup. All those little things can take a bass that just kind of sounds so-so and uninspired and turn it into an instrument that sounds really good. It's something that, you know, you start looking at and saying, okay, well, I can upgrade the pots maybe. I'm not upgrading the pots on this one because I happen to like the way the bass sounds. It sounds pretty good. But I've purchased Fender American pots, for example, from somebody on Talkbass and put them into a Squier jazz bass. Made all the difference in the world. Sounded so good. Opened up that instrument tremendously. So higher quality pots, they certainly help. It's certainly not worth worrying over, but if you're like, okay, what else can I squeeze out of this? Better capacitor, better pots, stronger, more solid wiring. It makes a big difference in the instrument, in most instruments. But if you're happy with the instrument, leave it the way it is. Play it. Enjoy it. So, Just basically some tips on how to take your bargain basement instrument and actually turn it into a player that it was always going to be from the factory had they actually just spent the time doing it, or had somebody actually taken the instrument initially and set it up properly. A lot of times that's all it is. Just a little TLC. A couple $100, maybe not even $100, and some time on the bench with somebody that knows what they're doing, and maybe that person is you, and that could be a player. So, good luck and keep it low.